Well, it looks like the odds are over. I guess they are. Anyway, congrats on getting first, Skeleton. Man, my fan is loud. Okay, that's one fan turned off. So I hope everyone has had a wonderful week this week so far. Why am I short? Okay. I hate it when stuff gets moved on here. Yes, the ad break is over. Huzzah! Now you just get my creepy background music. Which I never really talk about, but it's down in my links below. It is a track called Mysterious Moments. Which is, I guess, technically good for tonight because we're doing mysteries. One of the artists on Humble Bundle has a tendency to just release soundtrack compilations. And I go through a lot of those. Well, at least I have a lot of them. I haven't used a lot of them. But he also did the one in my opening screen. I had one when I was using my closing screen. But I have my spoken version of Enter Sandman playing now. Which I need to record because I'm not very loud in that. Which was fine because I'm typically talking over it anyway. But it is Thursday, I believe, I think. I hope. Let's check my calendar because I don't know. Yes, it is Thursday. August 8th. Whose birthday is today? But anyway, it's actually like my grandmother's 94th birthday this weekend. Hey, Guilty, welcome in. Congrats on second. Yeah, we are doing more detective stories today. Or tonight, or whatever happens to be. Yay, it played. I think you guys heard it. I heard it. I've got the stream muted, so I don't really hear what's going through. Ah, good. So I added more blurb ones. They're the ones that you have to touch on the screen, but I still have the blurbs TTS, even though I have a points TTS too. So, of course, neither of them go to the recording track. So, anyway, we are again doing Rivals of Sherlock Holmes. And of course, as soon as I start streaming, my family starts sending me messages. It's not like I haven't told them that I've had the same time schedule for over 2 years now. Oh god, it's been over 2 years. Oh crap, I'm coming up on almost streaming for 3 years. When is my actual stream anniversary? I know it's this month, but hold on, I gotta look at my calendar real quick. Crazy to think that I've been doing this for 3 years already. Is it monthly? Okay. Okay, so August 10th, which also happens to be my grandmother's birthday, is the anniversary of me streaming. I've been streaming since August 10th, 2021. Damn. You'd think I know what I was doing by now. Well, to be fair, we couldn't go see her because the entire family was sick and we were in the middle of a plague. And I was playing the game Black Book. Dang, but 3 years of this. I'm still technically using my first model. I use my second one occasionally, but it's a chibi version, so I don't use it that often. Man, 3 years. That's crazy. That's a gaming stream, so it'd be on my second channel. Anyway, back to the study. 3 years. That still just floors me. I may do something on the 11th. Because I'm doing another game with the Papa Penguin. Perils and Princesses. Yes, that was one of my cats. And he has a tendency to be chatty. I cannot reach the fluff ball. He is gone to the other side of my computer. But anyway, I'm still kind of floored by the whole 3 years thing. It's really bad, this means. It's a week after I got my second to last job. Which was probably another reason why I didn't go to see my grandmother on vacation, because new jobs typically won't let you have days off. And I think that job was for the cable company. So there's no way in hell they would have let me off. Yeah, cut the Zangus. Anyway, I should probably get into the stories. Is it time? It is 9:10. It is time for stories. And we're doing a different author this time, because we finished the 4 stories that I had for Conan Doyle in this book last week. What's really bad about this particular book, it's collections of stories that were taken from The Strand, which was a British mystery magazine, basically. So they'd have just stories in the magazine and everything else. And this book is a compilation of other stories that were being printed at the same time as Sherlock Holmes stories were. That's why it's rivals of Sherlock Holmes. And of course, they're not in any particular order, and the author isn't doing things in order either. Ooh, this is a female detective story. Even better. Her name is horrible, though. It's Miss Van Snoop. I mean, we're on the nose about things here. And this was written by Clarence Rook. I'll put all the details when I do the VOD on YouTube, because I'll have the description and everything else on there. Snoop-a-doopy. Anyway. Into the story. The Stir Outside the Café Royal. A story of Miss Van Snoop, Detective. By Clarence Rook. Colonel Mathurin was one of the aristocrats of crime. At least, Mathurin was the name under which he had accomplished a daring bank robbery in Detroit, which had involved the violent death of the manager, though it was generally believed by the police that the rossitor, who was at the bottom of some long-firm frauds in Melbourne, was none other than Mathurin under another name, and that the chief designer and chief gainer in a sensational murder case in the Midlands was the same mysterious and ubiquitous personage. But Mathurin had some years of successfully eluded the pursuit. Indeed, it was generally known that he was the most desperate among criminals, and was determined never to be taken alive. Moreover, as he had involuntarily worked through subordinates who knew nothing of his whereabouts and were scarcely acquainted with his appearance, the police had but a slender clue to his identity. As a matter of fact, only two people beyond his immediate associates in crime could have sworn to Mathurin if they had met him face to face. One of them was the Detroit manager, who was shot with his own hand before the eyes of his fiancée. It was through the other that Mathurin was arrested, extradited to the States, and finally made to atone for his life of crime. It all happened in a distressingly commonplace way for so far as the average spectator was concerned. But the story, which I have pieced together from the details supplied, firstly, by a certain detective sergeant, whom I met in a tavern hard by Westminster, and secondly, by a young, certain woman named Miss Van Snoop, has an element of romance if you look below the surface. It was about 1:30 o'clock on a bright and pleasant day that a young lady was driving down Regent Street in a hansom which she had picked up outside her boarding house near Portland Road Station. She had told the cabman to drive slowly as she was nervous behind a horse, and so she had leisure to scan, with the curiosity of a stranger, the strolling crowd that nearby all hours of the day throngs of Regent Street. It was a sunny morning, and everybody looked cheerful. Ladies were shopping or looking into the shop windows. Men about town were collecting an appetite for lunch. Flower girls were singing, "Miss Violets and sweet violets, penny a bunch." And the girl in the cab leaned one arm on the apron and regarded the scene with alert attention. She was not exactly pretty, for the symmetry of her features were discounted by a certain hardness in the set of her mouth. But her hair was dark, as to be almost black, and her eyes of grayish blue set with her beyond comparison with the commonplace. Just outside the Café Royal, there was a slight stir and a temporary block in the foot traffic. A brougham was setting down. Behind it was a Victoria. Behind that was a hansom. And as the girl glanced around the heads of a pair of the brougham, she saw several men standing on the steps. Leaning back suddenly, she opened the trap door in the roof. "Stop here," she said. "I've changed my mind." The driver drew up by the curb, and the girl skipped out. "You shan't lose by a change," she said, handing him half a crown. There was a tinge of American accent in the voice, and the cabman pocketed the half-crown with thanks and smiled. "They may talk about that McKinley tariff," he soliloquized as he crawled along the curb towards Piccolo Circus, "but it's a better and free trade. Lumps." Meanwhile, the girl walked slowly back towards the Café Royal, and with a quick glance at the men who were standing there, she entered. One or two of the men raised their eyebrows, but the girl was quite unconscious and went on to her way to her luncheon room. "American, you bet," said one of the loungers. "They'll go anywhere and do anything." Just in front of her as she entered was a tall, clean-shaven man, faultlessly dressed in glossy silk hat and frock coat, with a flower in his buttonhole. He looked round for a moment in search of a convenient table. As he hesitated, the girl hesitated. But when the waiter waved him to a small table laid for two, the girl immediately sat down behind him at the next table. "Excuse me, madam," said the waiter. "This table is set for 4. Would you mind?" "I guess," said the girl. "I'll stay here where I am." And the look in her eyes, as well as a certain sensation in the waiter's palm, assured her against further disturbance. The restaurant was full of people lunching, singing, or in 2s and 3s or even larger parties. Many curious glances were directed to the girl who sat at a table alone and pursued her way calmly through the menu. The girl appeared to notice no one. When her eyes were off of her plate, they were fixed straight ahead, on the back of the man's head who had entered in front of her. The man, who had drunk half a bottle of champagne with his lunch, ordered liquor to accompany his coffee. The girl, who had drunk an aerated water, leaned back in her chair and wrinkled her brows. They were very straight brows that seemed to meet over her nose when she wrinkled them in a perplexity. Then she called the waiter. "Bring me a sheet of notepaper, please," she said, "and my bill." The waiter laid the sheet of paper before her, and the girl proceeded, after a few moments' thought, to write a few lines in pencil upon it. When this was done, she folded the sheet carefully and laid it in her purse. Then, having her bill, she returned to her purse, to her dress pockets, and waited patiently. In a few minutes, the clean-shaven man at the next table settled his bill and made preparations for departure. The girl at the same time drew on her gloves, keeping her eyes immovably upon her neighbor's back. As the man rose to depart and passed the table at which the girl had been sitting, the girl was looking in her mirror upon the wall and patting her hair. Then she turned and followed the man out of the restaurant, while a pair at an adjacent table remarked to one another that it was a rather curious coincidence for a man and woman to enter and leave at the same moment when they had no apparent connection. But what happened outside was even more curious. The man halted for a moment upon the steps at the entrance. The porter, who was in conversation with the policeman, turned, whistle in hand. "Handsome, sir," he said. "Yes," said the clean-shaven man. The porter was raising his whistle to his lips when he noticed the girl behind. "Do you wish for a cab, madam?" he asked, and then blew upon his whistle. As he turned again for an answer, he plainly saw the girl, who was standing close behind the clean-shaven man, slip her hand under his coat and snatch from his hip pocket something which she quickly transferred to her own. "Well, Lem," began the clean-shaven man, swinging round and feeling for his pockets. "Have you missed anything, sir?" said the porter, standing in front of the girl at the bar exit. "My cigarette case is gone," said the man, looking from one side to another. "Oh, what's this?" said the policeman, stepping forward. "I saw the woman's hand in the gentleman's pocket, plain as a pikestaff," said the policeman. "Oh, that's it, is it?" said the policeman, coming close to the girl. "I thought as much." "Come now," said the clean-shaven man. "I don't want to make a fuss. Just hand back the cigarette case and we'll say no more about it." "I haven't got it," said the girl. "How dare you? I never touched your pocket." The man's face darkened. "Oh, come now," said the porter. "Look here, that won't do," said the policeman. "You'll have to come along with me. Better take a four-wheeler, eh, sir?" For a knot of loafers, seeing something interesting in the wind, had collected around the entrance. The four-wheeler was called, and the girl entered, followed closely by the policeman and the clean-shaven man. "I was never so insulted in my life," said the girl. Nevertheless, she sat back quite calmly in the cab, as though she was perfectly ready to face this or any other situation, while the policeman watched her closely to make sure that she did not dispose of any surreptitious way of the stolen article. At the police station hard by, the usual formalities were gone through, and the clean-shaven man was constituted for prosecutor. But the girl stoutly denied having been guilty of any offense. The inspector in charge looked doubtful. "Better search her," he said, and the girl was led off to a room for an interview with a female searcher. The moment the door closed, the girl put her hand into her pocket and pulled out a cigarette case and laid it upon the table. "There you are," she said. "That will fix matters so far." The woman looked rather surprised. "Now," said the girl, holding her hand out, "feel in the other pocket and find my purse." The woman picked out the purse. "Open it and read the note on it, a bit of paper outside." On the sheet of paper, which the waiter had given her, the girl had written these words, which the searcher read in a muttered undertone. "I was going to pick this man's pocket as the best way of getting him into the police station without violence. He is Colonel Martham, alias Rossiter, alias Connell, and he is wanted in Detroit, New York, Melbourne, Colombo, and London. Get 4 men to pin him unawares, for he is armed and desperate. I am a member of the New York Detective Force. Nora Van Snoop." "It's all right," said Miss Van Snoop, quickly, as the searcher looked up at her after reading the note. "Show that to your boss right away." The searcher opened the door. After a whispered consultation, the inspector appeared, holding the note in his hand. "Now then, be spry," said Miss Van Snoop. "You needn't worry. I've got my credentials right here," and she dove into another pocket. "But do you know what can be sure," said the inspector, "that this man is the one who shot the Detroit bank manager?" "Good heavens, didn't I see you shoot Williamson with my own eyes? Didn't I take service for the police to hunt him out?" The girl stamped her foot, and the inspector left. For 2, 3, 4 minutes she stood listening intently. Then a muffled rout reached her ears. 2 minutes later, the inspector returned. "Oh, I think you're right," he said. "We found enough evidence on him to identify him. But why didn't you give him the charge of the police before arrest?" "I wanted to arrest him myself," said Miss Van Snoop. "And I have... oh, Will. Miss Van Snoop sank into a cane-bottomed chair, laid her hand upon the table, and cried. She had earned the luxury of hysterics. In half an hour, she left the station and, proceeding to a post office, cabled her resignation to the head of the detective force in New York. Okay. That was interesting. Framing yourself for pickpocketing, make him go to the police office. That's definitely one way to get someone arrested. And thank you for that, Female detective from America. That was a very good reading. And to think she was the female witness to the shooting. The guy didn't recognize her, but she recognized him. That was a really short story. That's the only one I have for her? Because that, well, I guess if you quit her job as soon as she did that, I guess it would make sense. Yep, just that one. Next story is actually a little bit shorter. Crazy. Oh. Ah. A Texan at the Olympics. Well, yeah, I could kind of expect that. Texans go hard. They should do that anyway. I can completely picture a Texan throwing a French pickpocket downstairs. Texas has a reputation for a reason, and not always a good one. Okay. So our second story. Oh, God, excuse me. Do not clip that. Man, that was loud enough I heard it on the playback. No, do not clip it. I have friends who like to play random clips. Or clip it, I don't know. It'll give them something to laugh at. You can clip it if you want to, Skeleton. I can tell you that did not taste good at all. Anyway. Our second story for tonight. An Unposted Letter by Newton MacTavish. Outside, a hammer pounded mockingly. The gallows were under construction. Through the iron bars of the prison window shone a few straggling shafts of sunlight. My client rested on his elbows, his chin in his hands. The light glistened on his matted hair. He heard the hammering outside. "I guess I might as well write the line to Bill," he said, not raising his head. "Can you get a pencil and paper?" I got them, and then waited until he had written. "Dear Bill, by the sound of things, I reckon I've got a swing this trip. I've had hope all along that I might get sent to the right track, but I see that 6-Eye will be blinked to kick the bucket. And with head up, the galley's gonna go up mighty fast. But a feller can't lust to do just the fancies. I guess he can't do all this to it, can he, Bill? You never know how I got into the scrape, did you? One day I was just standing around doing nothing, when I saw a pair of runaway horses coming down the street like mad. I jumped out and caught the nigh one by the bridle. I hauled him up on us mighty sudden, but something swung me round and I struck my head against the neck yoke. Smash! When I come to, I was sitting back in the carriage with the sweetest-faced girl bending over me and wiping my face with cool water. She asked me where she could drive me home, and, do you know, Bill, for the first time, I was ashamed to say where. But I told her, and so help me, she came clear down in there with me and made Emily put me to bed. She left money, and every day till I got well, she come out and sat to read me the Bible and all them things. Do you know, Bill, it wasn't long before things seemed different. I could have looked at her purse, sweet face, plan a job. The last day she came, I made up my mind I'd try something else. Quit burglaring. I started out to get work. One man asked me if I'd served my time at. I said I'd served most of it in a jail, and then he wouldn't have anything to do with me. A chap gave me a couple of days breaking stones in a cellar. He said I did it so good that he guessed I must have been in jail. After that, I couldn't get nothing to do, because no one wouldn't have nothing to do with a jailbird, and I had made up my mind to tell the truth. At last Emily began to kick and little Bob to cry for grub. I got sick of hunting for work, and it seemed as if everybody was pushing me back to my old job. I got disgusted. I had to do something, so I sat down and planned to do a big house in the suburbs. I sized it up before. The moon was high that night, so I waited until it went down long after midnight. Found the back door already open, and so it was a snap to get in. I went upstairs and picked on the side room for near the front. I eased the door and looked in. The candle flickered low and flames danced from a few coals in the fireplace. I entered noiselessly. A high-backed chair in the front of the hearth. I sneaked up and looked over the top. A young girl, all dressed in white with a low neck and bare arms, laid there asleep. Her hair hung over her shoulders. She looked like just as she'd come out of a dance. Just threw herself there tired out. I was just going to turn away, and the flames in the fireplace flickered, and I caught a glow of rubies around the girl's throat. How they shone and gleamed, and shot fire from their blood-red depths. The candle burned low and sputtered, but the coals on the hearth flickered, and the rubies glowed, and the girl breathed soft in her sleep. It's an easy trick, I said to myself, and I leaned over the back of the chair, my breath fanning the light hair that fell over her marble shoulders. I took out my knife and reached over. Just then the fire burned up a bit. As I leaned over, I saw her sweet, girlish face, and so help me, Bill, it was her. Her whose face I couldn't look into and plan a job. Hardly knowing it, I bared my head and stood with a knife in hand, blood rushing to my face, my feelings some way seeming to dawn again. I looked at her and gently closed my knife and straightened up from the sneaking shape a feller gets into. I remembered a verse that she used to read to me. Ye shall not go forth empty-handed. so I said to myself I'd try again. But just as I was turning to go, I heard a shot in the next room and then a heavy thud. I stood stock still for a jiffy and then ran out in time to see someone dart down the stairs. At the bottom I heard a stumble. I hurried along the hall and ran straight into the arms of the butler. I guess someone else was doing that job that night, but they had me slicker and whistle. It was no use. Everything went against me. I had on my big revolver, the mate to the one you got, and it happened one chamber was empty, and the bowl they took from the old man's head was the same size. I had a bad record. It was all up with me. The only thing they brought up in court was to the contrary was the top of an ear they found in the hall, where someone must have got hit again with something sharp. But they wouldn't listen to my lawyer. Give up burglaring, Bill. See what I've come to? But I hope you'll do a turn for Emily if she's in good need and don't earn little Bob Filchin. Do this for old pal's sake, Will. The doomed man stopped writing, as the last shaft of sunlight passed beyond the iron bars of the prison window. Outside, the hammering had ceased. The scaffold was finished. You'll find Emily, my wife, in the back room of the basement of 126 River Street, said my client, handing me the letter. She'll tell you where to find Bill. I took the letter, but did not know then its contents. I started, but he called me back. You have a flower in your buttonhole, he said. I'd like to wrap it up and send it to Emily. Next day, after the sentence of the law had been executed, I went to find Emily. I descended the musty old stairway at 126 River Street, where all filth of squalor. At the back room I stopped and rapped. A towsy head was thrust out of the door. "They're gone," it said. "Where?" "Don't know. A woman went with some man." "Did you know him?" "I saw him here before sometimes, but the top of his ear wasn't cut off then. They called him Bill. Sort of a pal." "And where's the little boy?" "He's gone to the shelter." I went out into the pure air and, standing on the curbstone, read the letter. The only thing they brought up in court to the contrary was the top of an ear. When I had finished, I remembered the flower in my hand. I didn't throw it away. I took it to my office and have it there still, wrapped in the same paper that he gave it to me. That sucks. The guy went to his rescuer's house to just get something stolen. His best friend was there and killed someone, but got away, and he was the one who was caught. And the friend came and took his freaking wife. Dude. That's just... And dropped the son off at an orphanage. That's just wrong on so many levels. Man was trying to go clean, and his best friend ends up getting him caught for murder. That just... yeah. Remember, kids, don't steal your friend's wife after you get him framed for murder. It's not bueno. Especially getting rid of the kid. drop the kid off at some freaking orphan shelter? Anyway. I guess we'll get on to our next story. And it's another author. I will take a drink. It really does. As you know, wouldn't say quite Shakespeare, but a guy's confession letter that he gave to his lawyer to send to his wife. Well, it actually sent to his best friend. Hey, Abby. Hey, Fred. How you doing? But the guy is caught in a house where someone was just murdered. They have evidence to show that it wasn't him. And he writes his essential confession and letter to his wife. Well, he writes it to his friend, but it has to be sent it to him by way of... That's just... I don't like that story. I'm doing pretty good, Fred. And these short stories are... all over the place. I mean, the female detective was... At least that was a clever story. What's for dinner? Okay. I know what. Fred, what's he be cooking for dinner? It's very likely better than what I had for dinner. Because all I had was beans and cornbread. Pizza rolls, those would be nice. I haven't had pizza rolls for a while. The most wolf thing I've ever said is what's for dinner? No, that would be who's for dinner. Oh yeah, I just had like beans and cornbread for dinner. Which would probably explain that really loud belch I did earlier. Ah, come on, skeleton. Nothing wrong with chewing on a bone occasionally. I'll think about giving it back after I chew on it for a while. You got teeth for a reason. Oh yeah, they're your bones. They just have a little gnawing mark on it, no problem. I mean, you don't need the marrow, do you? Okay. Get back to reading. Okay. So our next story, The Black Narcissus by Fred M. White. Twisting the card in his fingers, Lancaster Vane stood impatient. He had all the novel's scaring, lighting, flash of passion for peril interruption. "Didn't I tell you?" he growled. Then he paused, with a surging sense of humor at most. The black-and-white starched parlor-maid was wilting before his scathing indignation. "Don't you know that I once murdered a maid who disobeyed my orders like this? Show the man in!" The girl gurgled and then vanished. Then followed a man with a gliding step and a moist gray eye that took the whole room and the whole trim garden beyond, and eked the novelist in the flesh of a camera, and held the picture of the mental gelatin for all time. "I'm afraid I'm intruding upon you, sir," the stranger suggested. "Oh, you are," Vane said quietly. "Don't let that trouble you, though. I always work in the mornings and I play golf in the afternoon. I make this arrangement so that if people waste my time in the mornings, I can make it up by sacrificing my pleasure after luncheon." Inspector Darch of Scotland Yard ventured upon a smile. "I come upon business of importance," he said. "I guess that's from your card. Had you not been the policeman, I should have declined to see you. In search of a copy, I have spent a great deal of time in police and criminal courts, and I am bound to say I have a certain affection for the average constable. He has imagination. The way he generally gives his evidence shows that. He is a novelist and a nut." Inspector Darch looked searchingly at the speaker. He was a little disappointing. He was not tall and pale, with flashing eyes and long hair. To the contrary, his hair was that of an athlete, and he might have passed as a pugilist of a better class. The sensitive mouth and fine gray eyes saved the countenance of his commonplace. Thus it was that, after a second searching gaze, Darch seemed to see a face kaleidoscope, from broad commonplace into the rugged suggestion of a young Gladstone. Here was no ordinary man. But then everybody who had studied Lancaster Vance's novels knew that. "My complaint is that we all lack imagination," the inspector said. "Of course, what you so playfully allude to is inventiveness. Young policemen always invent. They fancy their first duty is to get to conviction. But they have no imagination. I've got a name and a good reputation, but no imagination." "You have come to a deadlock in some case you have on hand." "Well, that's it, sir, and I've made so bold as to come to ask for your assistance." "Come out in the garden and smoke a cigar, then," Vane said suddenly. Darch complied willingly. Vance's thatched cottage was on a river, a tiny place consisting of a large study, a smoking room, a dining room, and the quarters at the back for bachelor friends. Hither he had come earlier in the season than usual, with the intention of finishing a novel before turning from his beans and bacon, as he phrased it, to the butterfly delights of his London season. The Vane's books were satires for the most part, and he knew his world as well as any man living. Audacity and insight were the jewels in the wheel of his style. He had a marvelous faculty for seeing through a thing, a faculty that made him both respected and feared. The garden was a riotous delight of daffodils and tulips, but primrose and narcissus. There was no finer show of those pure spring flowers to be seen anywhere. Vane had a perfect passion for flowers, especially the spring varieties. He could name a bulb as a savant could locate a flint in the sandstone. With an eye for detail, Darsh did not fail to notice that there were no less than 16 varieties of daffodils. "Here I live for my work and my flowers," said Vane. "When down here I smoke a pipe and live more or less on fish and bacon. When I'm in town I am nice over my wine and critical to rudeness over my friends' cigarettes. Are you fond of flowers, Mr. Darch?" "At present, I am deeply interested in them," Darch replied. "And thereby hangs the tale," said Vance. "Do go on." "There, I knew you were a man for me," Darch said admiringly. Vane smiled. Even for a novelist, is only a man in disguise. "Heavens, if I'd only got that insight of yours. It's a murder case, sir." "You have a murder case on hand that utterly puzzles you?" Vane had dropped thoughtfully, pulling in a rusted garden seat, where he was thoughtfully pulling on his pipe. "And the matter is not remotely connected with flowers," he concluded. "Got it again, sir," the delighted Darsh exclaimed. "You see, it's like this. I've read all your books, indeed. I've read most novels that make for a study of humanity, and I don't deny that I've learnt a lot that way." "Have you really?" Vane said quietly. "I don't mind your little joke, sir. I've learned that an innocent man can show exactly the same terror as a guilt caught red-handed. I've learnt, but no matter. And many a time it has struck me what a wonderful detective a first-class novelist would make. I don't mean in little things, such as tracking criminals and the like. I mean in elucidating big problems. When we exhaust every avenue, his imagination would find a score of others, especially if he has a good physical knowledge, as you men. Now I've got a case on hand that I believe you can solve for me, sir." "Possibly," said Vane, "but where does my psychological knowledge come in?" "Seeing that there is no suspect, and that the victim is a stranger to me." "The victim is no stranger to you, Mr. Vane. I found that out, and because you know him, and because of your novels, I'm here today." "This is getting interesting," Vane murmured. "The victim?" "Ernst Van Oot. He was found dead in his cottage at Primal last night, and there is not the slightest trace of the murderer. Van Noop lived in his house quite alone, and he seemed to have no hobby or occupation beyond his little garden and greenhouses. Except when he was spouting sedition in Hyde Park on Sundays," said Vane. "I'm sorry to hear about this. Really, Van Noop was a perfectly harmless creature, and its heart as gentle as a child. A little eccentric, but that was all." Darch dissented mildly. He was bound to regard the doings of a dead Dutchman with an official eye. The man had been an anarchist of the worst type. The Sunday orations would never have been tolerated in any other country. His doctrines were, to say the least, inflammatory. "You're quite wrong," said Vane. "Poor Van Noop would not have injured a fly. In his way, the man is a genius, and genius must have an outlet, or an apt to become changeable upon the rates. Anarchy was Van Noop's safety valve. He and I came together over a common table of flowers, bulbs especially. He could have worked wonders in the way of hybrids and new varieties had he lived. Your dangerous character theory won't hold water. I defy you to prove to me that the poor old Dutchman consorted with notoriously dangerous characters." "Then why did he ask for police protection?" Darch demanded. "What was he afraid of? He had no money or valuables. He never went near any of the Soho clubs. So far as we can tell, nobody suspicious ever went near him. Yet for the last few days, that man has been frightened out of his life. Afraid of being murdered, he said. At the same time, he refused to give any account of the party or parties who held him in terror, and he point-blank declined to open his mouth as to the reason for the threats of danger. Fancy he was a nihilist who had fallen under a ban of the order? I feel particularly certain of it, sir, Darrett replied. He has been murdered by those people, and they left no trace behind. That is why I'm here. Vane smiled in a manner calculated to annoy anybody but a detective. I don't fancy you are wrong to suspect the imagination of a novelist, he said, especially to a novelist who knows the victim. I don't know the murderer any more than you do, but I'll prophesy for you once. Within a week you shall have the assassin within your hands. Come, isn't that the assertion enough for even a writer of fiction? You can put your hand on the nihilist, Darsh cried. You know him? I don't know him, and he isn't a nihilist, Van replied. I haven't the remotest idea who the murderer is, and yet I stick to my opinion. I'm going entirely on a theory, which theory is built upon some knowledge of the dead man's past. You will, perhaps, be glad to hear that it is a theory that would only occur to a novelist. Therefore, you are perfectly right in the loon of policy that brought you here. Now, perhaps you will be so good as to tell me all the details. The details are nil, practically, Raj replied. The policeman on duty near Van Noop's cottage had certain special orders. He noticed that the door was not open late in the afternoon, and he could not make anyone hear. And then he burst open the door and found Van Noop lying dead in the kitchen with a wound on his side. There were no signs of violence. Indeed, Van Noop must have been taken quite by surprise, for just under his heel, as if he had stepped upon it, was a small squashed onion. "Onion!" Vane cried. "An onion! Great Scott!" The mention of the homely yet pungent vegetable seemed to have the strangest effect on the novelist. He glanced at Dash with mingling contempt and pity. A great agitation possessed him as he restlessly strode to and fro. Then he dropped into his seat again, and his shoulders shook into a fit of uncontrollable laughter. "You will pardon me," he said after a pause, "but your apparently commonplace words swept all the strings of emotion at once. And yet you say there's no clue. Now, could you have any clue stronger than an onion?" "You are slightly too subtle for me, sir," Darsh said, not without heat. "I beg your pardon," Vane said contritely, "but I should very much like to see that onion." Darsh replied that the request might be complied with. He would have permitted himself the luxury of satire with anybody else but Vane over the matter. But then Vane had made him a cold, concrete promise that he should handle the quarry within 7 days. From a novelist who had consistently refused to be interviewed, the promise carried weight. "Was there anything else?" Vane asked. "Nothing so prominent as the onion," Darsh replied. "I, of course, made a close examination of the body, and in the right hand I found a flower. It looks to me like a periwinkle. Of course, it is much faded, and perhaps you may attach some importance to it. Being an ordinary man, it conveys nothing to me." Vane's eyes were gleaming. The lines of his sensitive mouth twitched, and he was moved to laughter any more. He laughed inside. "I don't suppose it would," he said thoughtfully. Seeing that Van Noop was a lover of flowers, he might have been looking at the bottom at the moment when the fatal blow was struck. It would be quite natural for him to keep a flower in his grasp. "You have it, of course." "Oh, yes, sir," said Darsh. "One never quite knows. Did some great man once say that there are no such things as small details?" details are the cogwheels of great actions, Vane said sententiously. Give me the flower. Darsh took the withered bloom from his pocketbook. It was wilted and lank, with a green grass stem and some dank velvet tassels hanging forlornly from the head. It had been some precious treasure of the storied ages Vane could not have examined it more tenderly. What do you make of it? Darsh asked carefully. Vane shook his head. The bloom is too far gone at present, he said. It might be possible to revive it by plunging the whole into a tepid water and with a little salt in it. And yet, in spite of his assumed indifference, Vane's voice took a little as he shook. You had better leave this with me, he said. In any case, it will be quite safe in my hands. And as the inquest of Van Noop's body is over, you will not need it for the present. At the same time, I'm quite earnest over my prophecy. If you will come here this day next week at 6 p.m., I will go with you and assist you, if necessary, in arresting the murderer. Darsh departed, somewhat dazed at the result of this interview, but there was no smile on the face of the novelist, nothing but eager, palpitating curiosity, as he proceeded to plunge the wilted flower into water, to which a little salt was added. I'll go for a long pull in the river, he murmured. I can't stay here by that thing. I should get an attack of nerves watching it expand. I wonder if it is possible that... He came back at length, 2 hours later, and proceeded to the study. Then he drew the flower from the water, and behold, a glorious and pleasing transformation. The dead, drape-like petals was filled out to a velvety, glossy softness, black as night and lustrous as ebony. There were 5 of these black petals, and in the center the calyx was deep purple with a heart of gold. Vane's hands shook as if a wine had been examined by perfect flowers. His eyes were glowing with admiration. He flicked the water from it, and dried it carefully. Then he held it where the sun might play upon the velvety luster, and shine upon the perfect dead blackness. Vane's eyes were like those of a mother gazing at a child back from the gates of death. Now I know what Van Noop was hinting at, he said. He said he'd put a fortune in his pocket, and he was right. And I'm the only living man who has been yet permitted to look upon a black Narcissus. Okay, I'm going to take a break here because Twitch keeps telling me that it needs to run ads. So I will see you back in a few minutes. Okay, welcome back. I had to pause the ads like twice just so I could get through that section of the story. And it'll make it a little bit easier for me editing afterwards. But I also noticed that this particular story has 3 parts to it. So that was the first part that I just finished. And now I'll get into the second part. It was characteristic of Lancaster Vance that he should throw himself heart and soul into his undertaking. It had occupied him more than once, and the typical detective officer was lacking in imagination, and crime in the abstract interested him, as it must interest all writers of fiction. And more than once had he found his theories of some great case not only the variance with the police, but absolutely right when they had been absolutely wrong. That marvelous audacity and insight must have rarely failed Vane when delving and living and breathing humanity, and he had no fear of failure here. All the same, Inspector Darch began to grow uneasy with the 6th day came, and nothing had transpired, at least nothing of a tangible nature. He came to the cottage lake in the evening with a sufficiently flimsy excuse of seeing the man of letters. Vane was seated in the study, reading by the light of a shaded lamp, the vivid blood-red line of the fringed silk in the hut with the one crimson spot in a dim, shimmering blackness. The novelist half-sighted and then smiled as he laid down his book. "I'd forgotten all about you, Darch," he said. "You don't mean to say you've done nothing, sir?" the inspector cried. "On the contrary, I've done a great deal, my friend," Van replied. "I meant that I'd forgotten that you hadn't a moment. I was reading a novel which here, in my humble opinion, is the best that Dumas has ever wrote." "Monte Cristo?" Darch remembered. "Hear, hear." "No, it is not Monte Cristo," Vane replied. "I was alluding to the Black Tulip. Later on you will appreciate the value of the work. Imagination and education do a good deal for a man, but a judicious system of novel reading does more. Some day our prophet shall arise and tell the world what an influence for good the best novels have wielded. Do you know the book?" Darch admitted having skimmed it. He had found the characterization fable, and at least from a detective's point of view. Vane smiled. "I shall change your opinion presently," he said. "Have you discovered anything?" "As to Van Noop, you mean?" "No, sir. Have you?" "No," Van replied. "I'm still quite as much in the dark as yourself." "But you promised me within a week." "I would show you the man. Well, I'm going to do so. I haven't the remotest idea who he is yet, but I'm going to meet him tomorrow afternoon. When I have done so, I shall send you the telegram to Scotland Yard giving you the man's address and to the hour you are to meet me there. Does that satisfy you?" Darch expressed his thanks, but feebly. All this was very regular. Also, though it had an element of gasconade about it, it was impossible to look into Vane's strong, grave face and doubt that he believed every word that he uttered. If this were detective's work, why then it amounted to genius. And thus Darch departed, with a strong feeling of uncertainty. It was a little after 12 the next day that Vane set out to walk to the Pinner station of the Metropolitan, to the cottage recently inhabited by the unhappy Van Noop. Nearing his destination, he felt in his pocket for certain news cuttings and printed circular that had been there. And this printed circular was to the effect, on the same dates, the whole of the garden produce and plants and flowers, bulbs and apparatus generally, belonging to the late Ernst Van Noop, were to be sold by auction by order of the landlord under distress for rent. By the time Vane got to the cottage, a free sprinkling of the gardeners and florists had arrived, for Though the sale was a small one, Van Noop had been fairly well known amongst the Brotherhood, and there was just a chance of picking up an odd parcel or so of hybrid bulbs which might become worth their weight in gold later on. A lover of flowers and a man keen on anything new in that direction, Vane was respectfully recognized. Most of the dealers present were gathered in the kitchen of the cottage, where the bulbs were set out in little coarse blue paper bags. Most of them were properly labeled and catalogued, but there were 3 packets of 4 bulbs each, to which the most trained florist present could have found it hard to give a name. Vane pushed his way through the little knot of dealers. One of them touched his hat. "Anything new here, Harris?" he asked. "Well, sir," was the reply, "Von Noop was a close sort of party. I hear something, in fact. I read it in the Garden Herald today, as Van Noop had some wonderful black bulbs here. But maybe it's all nonsense. I can't make head or tail of those little packets yonder, and I should be sorry to risk a sovereign for the chance of them turning out to be nothing beyond the common. The other bulbs look good, but we could show a fine variety." "I'll speculate," said Vane. "There's a commission for you, Harris. You can go up to £5 for each of these particular packets, but not a penny beyond. Of course, it will be throwing money your way, but nothing venturing, nothing win. And it may be possible that the Garden Herald was right, and Van Noop had invented a black tulip after all." Vane had spoken loud enough for everybody to hear. Then he left the cottage and strode down with the air of a man who has important business before him. He came back later and lounged in the cottage unconcerned, with a pipe in his mouth. A small knot of buyers were still lingering there. Vane came up to Harris languidly. "Well," he asked, "do you want any check for those mysterious bulbs?" "No, sir," Harris replied, "and in my opinion, you've quite well out of it. I bet up to £5 and the stranger raised me a sovereign a bag, and I dropped it, of course. There he is. You haven't got a chance to see an amateur enthusiast at his best, but he's only a foreigner." With this, the finest insular contempt, Vance glanced carelessly at the sight, stooping figure, and thin, pinched features of a man who had incurred the florist's displeasure. The eyes he could not see, for they were behind glasses. Night, Skelton. "Evidently an enthusiast like myself," Vane said. "We all have our philosopher's stone, Harris." "I dare say we do," Harris replied sententiously. Vane smiled again. He passed over the auctioneer, and after a few minutes with that worthy scribbled out a telegram to pencil. When he looked round again, the foreign connoisseur had disappeared. Harris was busily engaged in directing the package of his own small purchase. "I'm coming over tomorrow to see that salmon Ariel as goes," said Vane. "I'm sorry to say that mine are doing indifferently. Not enough shade, perhaps." "That's it, sir," Harris replied. "Aristocratic flower naturally is the aracula. Put them in an old garden with their brothers under apple trees, and you can grow them like peonies. It's only country people who can grow auriculas." "I'll put a coat of arms over mine," Vane laughed. "By the way, as you were passing the station, will you be good enough to send this telegram for me?" The telegram merely contained an address, followed by a single figure, and was directed to Darch's registered address at Scotland Yard. To the casual reader, it conveyed nothing. Then Vane made his way to the road. He walked for a mile or two until he came, at length, to a pretty little cottage, a double-fronted one-story affair covered with creepers. There was a long garden in front, a garden deep sunken between trim, thick hedges, and black soil of which was studded with thousands of flowers. Hyacinthus, tulips, narcissus, nothing was wanting. Vane's artistic eye reveled in the lovely sights. He stood thus, feasting his soul on the mass of beautiful colors before him. The more important mission was forgotten for a moment. There was something of envy in Vance's glance, too, for with all his lavish outlay he could not produce blooms like these. And the owner of the place was obviously a poor man. Better soil, perhaps, Vane muttered. Perhaps it's because these beauties the whole attention of the grower. Flowers want more attention than most women. When those gladiolas come into bloom... Vane paused in his ruminations as the owner of the cottage came out. He had a black velvet skull cap on the back of his head, around which gray hairs straggled like a thatch. As he stood in the path of the setting sun, Vane noted the long, slender hand and a heavy signet ring on the right little finger. They were not the hands of a toiler or workman, and yet Vane they indicated both strength and resolution. "I'm admiring your flowers," he said. "They're absolutely perfect. I'm an enthusiast myself, but I have nothing like this." "Nothing so perfect," the old man said. "Won't you come in, sir?" The question was asked with a certain mixture of humility and high courtesy that seemed to take Vane back over the bridge of the centuries. The man before him was bent and shaken by the palsy of old age, and yet his eyes were full of fire and determination. His English was thin and foreign, and yet he spoke with the easy fluency of a scholar. Again Vane forgot his mission. An hour more passed, and the sun had flamed down behind the flagrant hawthorn, and Vane was still listening. He had met a man with an enthusiasm greater than his own. Vane was standing in the presence of a master, and he knew it. The man was talking excitedly. "I was a rich man once," he said. "The Van Eycks were in power in Holland at one time, and I ruined myself over flowers as Orientals ruin themselves over their harems. And as a visionary seeking for the elixir of life, flowers have ever been my mistress. I have given all my all for them, my life to the study of the secrets of nature. If I could only go down in posterity as inventor of something." "A black tulip, perhaps," Vane suggested. The dark eyes behind the glasses flashed. Vane looked at his watch. "Oh, yes," Van Eyck cried. "It was that fascinating romance that first set me thinking. Perhaps you, too, have had your dreams, sir?" "I confess it," Vane smiled. "You see, I'm a novelist as well as a florist. I'm still sanguine of seeing a black and velvety black flower. It was soft-stemmed when it comes, and, as you know, it will be a bulbous plant." "Perhaps I shall be able to show it to you." Van Eyck spoke quietly, yet with a thrill in his voice. His hand trembled with something more than the weight of years. His glance wandered towards the house. "I had it almost within my grasp 5 years ago," he said. "I was living near Amsterdam then. You should have seen my hybrids, black and white, and with patches, and the black predominating. Heavens, how I longed and waited for the next springtime." "You're speaking of tulips, of course?" Vane asked carelessly. "Oh, no," said Van Eyck. He paused in confusion as the red thread of his lips parted. Yes, of course I meant tulips. The black tulip." His gaiety was not a pleasant thing. It was too suggestive of a butterfly on the skeleton. "Oh, I waited for the springtime," he went on. "I waited as a prisoner for freedom, and they all came pink. My children had been stolen. Sir, you are a novelist. You can understand the frame of mind in which one commits murder." "Did you track the man who had robbed you?" Vane asked. After a time I did, but it was years, sir. I'm talking nonsense. You may have said too much in the excitement of the moment, Vane said coolly, but certainly you are not talking nonsense. You tracked your man and you killed him. Why? Van Eyck's hands went up with an almost mechanical gesture. At the same moment, a step was heard, crunching the gravel outside, and Darsh appeared. Vane made a motion with his hand in the direction of Van Eyck's bent, quivering figure. You have come just in time, he said. This is Mr. Darsh of Scotland Yard, and this is Mr. Van Eyck, the man who killed Van Noop a few days ago. Darsh was too astonished to speak for a moment. The dramatic force of the situation had almost overpowered him. For crime as a rule is sordid enough, and the heroic in the life of a detective is only the pages of fiction. This is a poor return for my courtesy, Van Eyck said, not without dignity. I have never heard of the gentleman you mention. Darsh looked helplessly at Vane. The suggestion that he was about to be fooled was painful. Never had the mantle of the majesty of the law lain more awkwardly on his shoulders. It is quite possible, Vane said, that you have never heard of Van Noop by that name. But assuredly you know all about the man at Piner, the man who was murdered, and some whose bulbs today fetch for £5 a packet, or nearly £2 per bulb. I have not heard of that. Strange, seeing that you purchased them, Vane went on. This is nonsense, Mr. Van Eyck. I saw you at the sale, and I'm even surprised that you did not see me. However, all this is beside the point. You bought those bulbs at an extravagant price because you believed that they were the bulbs of the black... There is not a black tulip in this world. Who said anything about a black tulip? Vane retorted. You were after was a black narcissus. Perhaps you will deny the existence of that? I should like to see it above all things. A sneer passed over Vane's head. He stepped close to Van Eyck and opened his overcoat. In the lapel of his coat, the stem carefully preserved in water, he wore Van Noop's black narcissus. The flower was slightly ragged at the edges, but it was all there, like a lovely woman past her prime. The effect was staggering. Van Eyck fell as if some unseen power had beaten him to his knees. Where did you get that? He said hoarsely. Where did you get it? Surely you need not ask the question, said Vane. It was in the one Van Noop was holding in his hand at the time he murdered him. Van Eyck rose slowly to his feet. He made no further denial of the grave charge, but seemed to be absolutely unconscious of the danger hanging over his head. He had only eyes for the flower in Vane's coat. Darsh watched the scene with some lively admiration. Let me see it. Let me hold it, said Van Eyck. He spoke like a man in a dream. I don't care what you do. I don't care what happens to me, as long as I can hold that flower in my hand. You need not be afraid. I will not injure it. Injure it, bah! Would a mother injure her firstborn? I have sold my soul for it as Faust sold his for Marguerite. His eyes had grown soft and pleading. It seemed impossible to believe that this gentle, quivering creature could have the blood of a fellow creature on his hands. Vane passed the flower over, and in spite of a glance of disapproval from Derek, it seemed like madness to hand over the prisoner's custody the strongest link of evidence against him, and how frail that link was. Van Eyck bent over the flower and pressed it to his lips. This is mine, he said. Mine. For 20 years I've labored to attain this result. Another hand grew it, another hand tended it, another hand fostered it. But the child is mine. Van Noop stole my black and white hybrids 2 years ago. And from this developed this. He has been no more than a clod who has made the frame and varnished the canvas, for the picture is mine, and I killed him. The confession was out at last. Darsh stepped forward. The man was merged in the official. For a moment he forgot to admire Vane in the wonderful way in which he had elucidated the mystery. He became a mere detective again. "I must warn you," he said, "that all you say will be taken in evidence against you." Van Eyck smiled. Then he handed the black Narcissus back to Vane. "What does it matter?" he said. "What does anything matter? I've seen all the fond hopes of years gratified. I can die happy. I care nothing whatsoever whether Van Noop or myself gets the credit for the black Narcissus, as long as it is there. He robbed me, I found him, and I killed him. Killed him with the very thing I coveted in his hand. He died with it in his hand, and I never knew it." "It is 2 years since I tracked Van Noop to England, after he robbed me. But then I settled down in this cottage, waiting my time. And for 2 years he lived within a mile of me, and I never knew it, never found it out. Last Sunday I was in London. I was passing through Hyde Park when I heard an anarchist addressing the mob. Something in his voice compelled me to draw near. It was my man, the man who had robbed me of the best part of my life. I followed him home. I found where he lived, and I waited my opportunity. And it came. I slipped in the cottage when the door was opened, and there he was, bending over a pot with a flower growing in it. I made a noise, and he turned and saw me. I fancied that it was his fear that caused him to break the flower in the pot, but I had only eyes for my foe. Then with a knife I had struck him in the heart, and he died without a murmur. For an hour I remained there, searching the house, but I could not find what it was I was searching for. I was looking for the black Narcissus, gentlemen. That is all." "One question," said Vane. "Had you been hanging around Van Noop's cottage?" "For 3 or 4 weeks, yes," Van Eyck replied. "I was seeing my opportunity." "Is it possible that he might have discovered this?" "Oh, it is possible. All these things are possible. Why?" "I was merely asking for any information," said Vane. "There was a point to be cleared up, and you have done it for us. I'm sorry for this, very sorry. It seems a pity that so fine and innocent a beautiful piece should be mixed up in a sordid crime like this." Van Eyck shrugged his shoulders. There was no trace of fear in his eyes now. Indeed, it seemed to Vane that those eyes were blazing with a fire beyond the bright glow of reason. "Most of the brightest jewels in the world are stained with blood," Van Eyck said. "And if your kids in your millionaires' houses could speak, what tragedies they might tell. Sir, I am in your hands. Sir, I wish you a good night." The Dutchman turned from Darsh to Vane with a stately courtesy. He might have been a lordly host bowing to 2 objectable visitors. A little later, and the prisoner found himself and a stolid policeman in the back of a dog-cart. Darsh lingered a moment before he took his seat. "Mr. Vane," he said, "this is really wonderful." "It is exceedingly painful and squalid to me," Vane replied. "But I see you are puzzled. You have seen the problem finished, and you are anxious to have the moves all explained. If you will come to the Lotus Club after dinner tomorrow night, I'll make everything clear. Say 9 o'clock. Mr. Vane, Starch said emphatically, I will be there. Part 3. And now, Darsh, said Vane as he finished the coffee daintily, I'm going to be egotistical. I'm going to talk about myself to the extent of some 1,000 words. As a rule, I get some 20 guineas per thousands of my words, but that is another story. The other night you came to me with a story of an anarchist who asked for police protection, because, so you imagined, he had done something wrong in the eyes of the nihilists and feared for his life. You came to me, in the first place, to obtain inspiration from a novelist, and secondly, because the victim was, like myself, an ardent lover of flowers. Now, in the first place, permit me to correct the wrong impression of yours. From your point of view, I should never make a good detective. I decline to believe the theory of obstinate deduction. Dupin and Sherlock Holmes were steeped in the lips of it. My word, what blunders they would have made if they reduced these theories to practice. Holmes takes a watch, and from a keyhole, by the scratches, and deduces that the owner was a man with dissipated habits. But suppose he had been partially blind or suffering from paralysis, huh? No, that's no good to save fiction. Now, I knew Von Nuke. I knew him to be incapable of injuring a fly. His socialism was merely a safety valve. The man might have been a visionary, but he didn't know about flowers what wasn't worth knowing. And the more he did, he hinted to me that he was on the verge of a great discovery. As bulbs were his hobby, and he was a Dutchman, also he was a great admirer of Dumas. I guess he was after a black flower. And they are all after it. And it was not to be a tulip, because Van Nuke didn't care much for tulips. Then you came to me and told me he had been murdered. You told me about the mysterious way in which he had asked for police protection, and instantly it flashed across my mind that someone had discovered his secret and was trying to get it from him. When you brought me that withered flower, I was sure of my argument, and when you spoke of the smashed onion, I was positive. He made me laugh over the onion, you remember? That probably was a bulb of the black Narcissus, though as a layman you were quite justified in taking it for a succulent vegetable. After you were gone, I developed the black Narcissus. There before me was the motive for the murder. It seemed to me that there had been a struggle for it, and that Van Nuke had destroyed the flower and crushed the bulb just before he was killed. Then, when the natural sequence of the important discovery, the story of the black tulip, came to my mind. I had it to find the man who committed a crime for the sake of Narcissus. And this is where the novel comes in. This was not a case of obvious deduction, it was a case of introspection. You would have gone blundering over your head nihilist, revenge, and the like. I simply had to weave a romance around that flower. A romance with blood in it. And gradually my art and my imagination led me to the true and only possible solution for the mystery. Van Nuke had been murdered for the sake of a black Narcissus played into the question. The assassin must know an enthusiast and a madman like himself. You will call this intuition. Then I had to draw my man. I found out when the sale was coming off, and the man who knows the address of every amateur gardener in London posted a special circular I had printed hinting that Van Nuke's collection held rare things to buyers. When I reached Van Nuke's cottage on the way of the sale, I had no idea who the murderer was, but I felt absolutely certain that he would be present, whether he had the circular or not. Then, in a stage whisper, I asked the florist to purchase a parcel or two of bulbs for me at a fancy price. As I expected, on my return I found that they had been bought over my head by someone else. And then, my dear Dosh, I knew the man who had murdered Van Nuke. I had only to go over to the auctioneer and obtain the address of the man who had given a large sum for the parcel of bulbs which he had fondly hoped to contain the black Narcissus. I obtained that address and followed Van Eyck to his cottage. "Wonderful!" Dodge cried. "I should have never thought of it." "Of course you wouldn't," Thane replied. crime for crime's sake would be the only motive that appealed to you. And why? Because it is impossible for the detective trained in the ordinary way to appreciate and understand the poetic side of crime. And yet I defy you to find anything more sordid in this case. The whole thing is absolutely medieval. In this prosaic age, it seems extraordinary that a man should commit murder for the sake of a flower. And yet, in Van Eyck, you have a man who would have done not shed a drop of blood for all the mines in Gondola. "You're right, sir," said Darch thoughtfully. "I was also right. I knew that the man with imagination would be required here, and I found him. But I don't mind confessing that I should never have dreamt the connection with the crime with a simple flower." "You might," said Vane. "When everything else failed, you would probably have started to look out of the owner flower, going to the theory that the dead man had snatched it from the coat of the murderer. Another time, perhaps, I may show you the detective theory that can be worked out in another fashion. And the next time you find an onion, be sure it is an onion and not a priceless bulb worth a king's ransom." I got a shiny. Ow. I need to stretch. Let's see. How long is the next story? Next story is 9 pages. But I may hold off until next week because it's a different author. So, let me change scenes real quick. Something like this. Haha! This is an upcoming project, which I don't know when I'll get to. I've got so many different things going on right now that... Try this again. But yeah. I've got animation and some other things to take care of for this one. So it'll be a little bit before I get ready. I'm not likely going to stream this, but it will be recorded strictly for YouTube. So, I won't see any money from it because I'll never get monetized on YouTube. But anyway, let's see who might be on to raid, because I'm ending a little early, but also started a little early. Let's see, who's on? I have to look at my own channel and see. Oh, wait. What is Falcor reading? How many people are here? 2? Is that just me and Kel? If anybody's here, feel free to emote spam. See what Falco's doing. Oz. And she's got horns. Hope no one's actually noticed this stuff I put in my tags today. Yeah. Look at Twitter real quick to see what's posted there on. Okay, well, nothing over my Twitters, and I've only seen one person come on. That would be Dusk. So, if nobody objects, we'll read Dusk. Again, thank you all for coming, and thank you for listening to the stories. And I will hopefully see you tomorrow for some Friday night fairy tales. I hope you all have a good night, get some good rest, have some pleasant dreams, and hopefully a better tomorrow. Because, everyone needs better tomorrow. Oop, wrong button. There's a raid message for followers. A raid message for subscribers. All 3 of you. And see you all over in Dusks. Again, I hope you have a great night. And, a pleasant tomorrow. Bye, everyone.